I have some questions for you, as you can imagine. As you well know, Understanding by Design, or UbD, is a very popular approach to designing projects and curriculum. It obviously speaks to a need that teachers have because it has become so very popular over the years. Can you talk a little bit about what you and Grant Wiggins were thinking about when you first started putting the ideas together?
Seminal to our thinking that resulted in the ideas of the Understanding by Design framework. One of them was in response to a problem that virtually every teacher from kindergarten to graduate school faces, and that's the problem of too much content and not enough time to teach it all. And as you know, in some subjects like science and history, the knowledge base is increasing almost daily, changed. So we think this is a classic challenge to teaching. How do we navigate the volume of content that is expected? The textbooks get larger with every new edition. The standards are ambitious in every new iteration. And so how do we do that? Well, one approach is to talk faster in class. You know, we can cover more, but that results at best in superficial learning. And so one of the goals of UbD was to help teachers focus and prioritize their teaching. And the title of our book is suggestive of what the priority should be. We propose that we prioritize and focus our teaching around the, quote, big ideas of the subject matter we're teaching. And the big ideas are in the form of concepts. Does that suggest that knowledge and skills aren't important? I mean, basic skills are foundational. You can't do anything without the basics. And knowledge is important. We're not diminishing the role of knowing things. But it strikes us that our job is really to help students develop the capacity to transfer their learning to new situations. And you can't transfer something you don't understand. And that if you're able to prioritize your teaching around the, quote, big ideas, the concepts and processes that are important for students to be able to apply, that helps you avoid getting lost in the weeds of just covering lots of content with no prioritizing filter or frame. And so another goal of Grant and I early on was around the question, how do we make teaching and learning more authentic, engaging, relevant for students? A related question, what motivates students to do their best work, to really try hard? So that was a second motivating factor in our thinking. And then a final point, briefly, was our interest in the emerging understanding of learning coming out of the cognitive sciences and increasingly through neuroscience. We have shifted, over the last 20, 30, well, 40 years probably in conception of learning to a more cognitive and constructivist view of learning. And we believe in that cognitive constructivist conception of learning and wanted to have a curriculum design process and an assessment system that was compatible with what we know about the best, most lasting learning.
Excellent. You've hit on so many important points. Thank you. And I think that whole shift from behavioralist to cognitive/constructivist, and I think that's all a very important part of the shift that teachers feel they need to make, but they have precious little guidance in helping in making that change. In the MOOC in the 3 modules that we've been working on so far, we've talked a bit about the importance of the design process itself, and the importance, as you've just said, of putting understanding at the center of the learning process. We've also talked about different design process very briefly. The universal design and Understanding by Design are 2 well-known approaches. Could you talk a little bit about the design process itself, the importance of that process that teachers need to go through as they work through Understanding by Design?
Understanding by Design is basically a curriculum design process, and the root meaning of the word curriculum, which is derived from Latin. And the root meaning of the word curriculum translates roughly as the course to be run. That's the meaning of curriculum. Too often, some educators at least, and some people outside of schools conflate standards with curriculum, but they're two different things. Standards, at least as used in the U.S., we have standards for mathematics and science and 21st century learning standards as well. But those aren't the curriculum. Those are outcomes. The curriculum is the path or the course to be run to achieve those outcomes or those ends. And so we need a process for creating our path to learning, our learning path, which is the curriculum. So that's more generally, and I think quite fundamentally, effective teaching requires effective planning. You can't just go in and wing it. You have to be deliberate, you have to be purposeful, and given the comments previously, you have to be able to prioritize from a large array of possible topics to teach. You can't teach them all, so you have to focus. So in part, a design process helps one do that. Design is a particular process, and Grant Wiggins and I have proposed 3 stages of curriculum planning. And we can use this process for teachers planning a unit of study with lessons within that unit. We can use it to plan an entire year or course, and we can use it to plan an entire curriculum backward 12 to pre-K. In essence, we describe stage 1 is where we identify desired results. And this is where we target our learning goals. Often these goals are derived from standards, but we often need to, quote, unpack the standards to identify in the standard, are we talking about a knowledge objective? Are we talking about a particular skill? Or are we talking about larger transferable ideas, which we call understandings, priorities? And as you noted, we highlight understanding as the priority to focus on, with knowledge and skill objectives being the means to those ends. Stage 2 of backward design is really at the heart of this design process, because stage 2 asks us to think like assessors and ask a very straightforward question. If these are the goals or the outcomes we're after, then what evidence of learning, skill, proficiency? About the assessment evidence before we get too invested in planning our activities, choosing resources, and marching through lessons. So that's the essence of backward design. We have found that that process helps to avoid 3 potential problems in planning and teaching. And let me highlight those briefly. Often translated as teachers are working from a textbook and feel they have to march through the book before the end of the year, or they're just ticking off a list of standards one at a time in the order in which the standards are written in the state or national document. We think that's a misunderstanding of curriculum and even their job. Our job is to have priorities and to focus on what we want students to do with their learning, which involves performance. The second problem we sometimes see is what we call activity-oriented curriculum. You tend to see this more at the elementary and middle school levels. Activity-oriented curriculum is just that. Teachers plan activities. The activities may be interesting, hands-on, engaging for kids, but unless the activities are purposeful, unless they're connected, why are we doing these things? I would say the potential infusion of technology sometimes gets into activity-oriented curriculum. Oh, we're going to bring in this technology, or we're going to have kids make this movie, or we're going to try this new web app. Well, that's fine if it's purposeful, but not for its own sake. And then the third problem that we have seen more widely in the last decade, driven by high-stakes testing, is translated as the only things we really emphasize in our teaching are those that are on the state or national tests. If it's not on the test, we don't teach it. Secondly, we're going to do a lot of practice testing in the test format. And so you get what I call multiple choice teaching and a lot of worksheets. That may be well-intentioned, but it is undercuts what we know about meaningful learning and student. So let me wrap up answer this question regarding how do the design processes of understanding by design and universal design for learning, UDL, connect. I think they are very complementary design processes, not at odds. And here's an analogy. Think about construction. We wouldn't build a building or propose to start building something without us a design. It gives us a vision of the final product, and it guides our building along the way. UbD provides a conceptual blueprint for curriculum planning, teaching, and assessment. Universal design for learning brings in another consideration, and that is we have diverse learners. So think about when the public access laws were passed around the country. Construction companies and engineers wheelchair ramps and accessible restrooms and so on. In their new buildings, they would build those in advance so that the construction was built around those accommodations. In older buildings, however, they had to go back and retrofit and break out and put in ramps where there were stairs and so on. So it makes sense to design mindful of the students we serve, and differentiation that we know will be needed. And we do that up front. UDL provides that frame and therefore is a perfect complement to understanding by design.
That's a great way to think about it. And I would like to think that all teachers are beginning to think about the ramps needed before before they get very far in their design process. So thank you. And we have both, we'll be talking about both design processes in this MOOC, so thank you. We've emphasized, as you know, the role of technology in this MOOC because we've been very concerned as folks who are interested in the affordances of technology. We've been very interested in how to use technology appropriately, and that's why we in our work at the Center for Technology and School Change have started many years ago, actually, when UbD was just very new, to think about how to employ it as a design process. I think you correctly talk about your concern that technology is often used in a busy work sort of way as an extra activity. And that was what we saw happening in many, many schools. You talk about in UbD about the Apple project and how it was all great fun, but the understanding, it wasn't clear what the understanding was at the heart of that project. And that's what we felt about many uses of technology. Could you talk a little bit about the potential links you see between the design process and technology?
With the extent to which we have great clarity about the learning outcomes or goals one has, whether it's a district curriculum or an individual teacher, the better able the district or the teacher will be to answer your question. So if we presume that, then we look at the answer with respect to what we want kids to learn. Now, I also recognize that there are certain cases where learning technology is the goal, and that's absolutely fine, and we would plan backward from that. A couple of thoughts about technology and education generally. The first is that we are in an era of world's knowledge on a smartphone. The implications for education to me are huge, and one that you're certainly exploring in your center. One implication, of course, is it strikes me that the capacity to access information on demand means that we can de-emphasize having kids learn to remember and highlight the importance of helping kids find information when they praise that information. Just because it's on Wikipedia or on a blog post doesn't mean it's accurate, complete, or unbiased. And thirdly, be able to employ what they find through technology for meaningful purposes. Understanding by design supports that intelligent use of technology. One, because the whole focus of UbD is on understanding and transfer. Stage 2 of UbD around authentic tasks. So there's nothing wrong with a test of facts if that's your main goal, But if you want to see if students can apply their learning, we need performance assessments or projects. And in conjunction with those, there are many opportunities for the natural infusion of technology. Technology, when well applied, boosts productivity, enhances efficiency, and makes sense to use.
What do you see around the corner? What do you anticipate in the next 10 years or so?
People are feed in two camps. One camp is, I would say, more traditional education, and I don't say that disparagingly, but where the focus is on subject matter learning. The organizational schools is in subject matter courses at the high school, and we have 40 minutes for social studies in elementary and so on. And then testing of subject matter knowledge. So that's one, if you will, is pushing for more emphasis on 21st century skills, on teaching how to learn, and to focus more on authentic projects and applications, a project-based learning approach. People that have studied project-based learning recognize that it's often much more engaging for kids. They can bring in technology and relevant. They're producing real products for real audiences, and so it's enticing and it's compelling. But there's a trade-off here. To go full-bore project-based learning means you're going to have to do some things that will be uncomfortable, perhaps. That is, you're not going to be able to cover everything in Algebra 1 or in world history, number one. Number two, if you truly are going to primary outcome, then why would we have English 3 and chemistry? Why would we have subject areas in the high school where we chunk up knowledge into 42-minute blocks? Grant Wiggins and I were both very reverent toward the nature of disciplinary knowledge. We don't dismiss that. What we know has been developed. We don't want to dismiss that, but at the same time, we don't think the goal is just covering lots of facts in a subject and testing for recall. I think there can be a marriage between more of an authentic project-based and problem-based approach to learning that can be fused with the important big ideas of disciplinary knowledge. But I think it's going to require shifts in structure of schools, in assessment practices, and in available resources. So I'm an optimist by nature, and I'm hopeful that we can begin to bridge the chasm between traditional subject matter learning and testing and more authentic project-based learning.
Well, I think we agree that student achievement is really at the heart of everything that we're all working towards. I want to thank you for coming to talk with us and for having the insight for you and to work with Grant and put together such an important book, I think, for so many educators around the country. I think the whole idea of designing curriculum was very new when you first put the book together, and it has served as a guidepost for thousands and thousands, millions of teachers. So we thank you for that.